Next, the pilot will initiate a steeper turn and proceed on to the longest or downwind leg. On this leg, the pilot will experience a tailwind coupled with the highest ground speed during the entire pattern. The downwind should be approximately 1/2 to 1 mile from the runway, and typically, the Warrior will reach traffic pattern altitude soon after turning onto the downwind. A common error during traffic pattern operations is that the pilot will fail to reduce power at the level-off point during the downwind leg. As a result, ground speed will increase dramatically and hinder the pilot's ability to effectively plan and configure for the rest of the pattern. So power should be reduced to approximately 2,000 RPMs, depending on atmospheric conditions, in order to establish the Warrior's downwind speed of 90 knots. If nothing else, the pilot should make it his or her goal to establish 90 knots and configure the aircraft prior to reaching the midfield downwind point. Now, what does configuration mean, you ask? Well, specifically, the airplane must be entirely set up for landing except for the introduction of flaps. Configuring can be accomplished using that trusty old Warrior mnemonic, BCGM. Boost pump should be on, carburetor heat as required, gas to the fullest tank, and mixture rich. As the aircraft is configured by midfield downwind, the pilot should anticipate reaching the pattern's abeam point. The abeam point is a very strategic location in the traffic pattern which defines the point at which the pilot will begin his or her final descent to landing. The abeam point should be referenced 90 degrees from the touchdown point and not the runway threshold. By setting the abeam point across from the intended touchdown point, the pilot can properly plan a seamless descent from the traffic pattern altitude to final touchdown. At the abeam point, the pilot should first reduce power to 1700 RPM and pitch the nose down to maintain the previously established 90 knots of airspeed. As the nose is being pitched down, the pilot must also extend flaps to the 10-degree position. This combination of flaps, power reduction, and pitching for 90 knots is intended to establish the Warrior in a steady descent at approximately 500 feet per minute. The descent will continue until the point at which the pilot is at an approximate 45-degree angle from the point of intended touchdown or from the preceding traffic. Once the pilot can visually confirm this approximate 45-degree angle, he or she can initiate a medium bank turn onto the base leg. Similar to the crosswind leg, the base leg is a shorter leg, at the bottom of the pattern you could say, that puts the airplane in a crosswind situation. Therefore, as the pilot turns onto the base leg, he or she must take care to turn more than 90 degrees and establish a crab once again into the crosswind and prevent drift. On the base leg, the pilot should extend flaps to 25 degrees and slow to 80 knots while at the same time continuing that steady descent. Once the pilot visually clears the extended final approach path of any other traffic, he or she can initiate a turn onto the final leg. The decision as to when to initiate this turn rests with the pilot in command and will be based on many factors, but namely the strength and direction of the wind and the airplane's speed over the ground. The turn should be made so that, upon rollout, the airplane is aligned with the runway and the final approach course. Now flaps should be extended to the final 40 degrees and airspeed should be reduced to 70 knots final approach speed. Once fully established on the final approach course, it is the pilot's responsibility to ensure that a stabilized approach is established and maintained all the way down to landing. For more information on the stabilized approach and the stabilized approach criteria, reference the AeroCast episode entitled Stabilized Approaches. The pattern will be completed when the pilot touches down at the POH computed touchdown speed within 1/3 but no sooner than 200 feet past the runway threshold. Remember that throughout the entire traffic pattern, all turns must be coordinated with rudder and accomplished using no more than 30 degrees of bank in order to allow for an adequate amount of stall spin protection. The pilot will learn over time with their instructor how to become situationally aware in a traffic pattern. Remember that as you fly, you will share traffic patterns with other aircraft. At a tower-controlled airport, ATC is responsible for traffic separation, but the PIC is still responsible to see and avoid. The PIC must follow all ATC clearances. If unable to comply with a clearance, however, it is once again the responsibility of the PIC to advise ATC immediately that they are unable to comply. And it's a whole different ballgame at non-towered airports. The pilot must be situationally aware to the point that they can communicate directly with other traffic and maintain adequate separation at all times. You can think of non-towered operations as all pilots working together to achieve a common goal, which is getting safely on the ground or safely in the air. Radio calls and position reports should be made at a minimum at least 5 miles from pattern entry, during the entry, on the downwind, base, final legs, and anytime exiting a pattern. Practice these calls with your instructor and develop an efficient working relationship with everyone else sharing the airspace and the runway. For the check ride, some notable points in the private pilot practical test standards require that the pilot complies with proper traffic pattern procedures, maintains proper spacing from other traffic, corrects for wind drift to maintain the proper ground track, maintains orientation with runway in use, and maintains traffic pattern altitude plus or minus 100 feet and airspeed plus or minus 10 knots. For further information on airport traffic patterns, reference the UND Aerospace Warrior, Aero, Seminole, and Cirrus Standardization manuals along with the Airplane Flying Handbook in Chapter 7 and the Airman's Information Manual, or AIM, in Chapter 4. And thanks for downloading yet another UND AeroCast video flight training episode.
This is Jerry in the fuel truck. Remember, clean fuel is your friend. Have fun. Fly safe.